Welcome to Flashback Friday on Harvesting Wisdom. Today, we revisit a powerful moment from our archives that continues to inspire sustainable change. Let's journey back and rediscover the wisdom that shapes our future.
Welcome to Harvesting Wisdom again. I'm your host, Mike McMahon. Today's guest is Tom Cosgrove. At Harvesting Wisdom, our mission is to tell the story of individuals and organizations that embrace sustainability, regenerative farming, land management as the cornerstones to a thriving and planet, ensuring prosperity and health for generations to come. My guest, Tom Cosgrove, today is the Chief Creative and Content Officer for EarthDayorg. He's got like an incredible pedigree of experience. He's the COO and General Manager for the Discovery and Science channels, the Executive Vice President of ABC Family Channel at Disney, the GM of TV Guide Television Group, and the Executive Vice President of Fox Family Worldwide at News Corp, and media positions at Leo Burnett USA. So I'd like to welcome and bring on my guest, Tom Cosgrove. Hello, Tom. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
I hope I got everything that you've I've encapsulated your entire life in about 30 seconds, but I'm sure you've done more than that. But did I miss anything in there? Tell me, kind of give me your story, like how you started. I think you told me that you grew up in the Southeast and ended up in Wisconsin and got your BA and your master's there. And then how did you get into all of this? This, I guess you would call this media, right? That you're
I guess
became
you
top dog in?
Call it that, sure. Yeah, I actually grew up I was born in Alabama, actually. And I don't really remember much of it, but moved to Wisconsin when I was 4 and grew up there and went to university there in Wisconsin and my MBA, and came out of that not really knowing what I wanted to do exactly.
I'm still looking to figure that out myself.
Right, exactly. I think I still am in many ways, but like a lot of people my age and coming from Wisconsin, I moved to the next biggest city, Chicago, and found myself working at an ad agency. Which was sort of in the realm of what I was thinking about doing. I got really interested in, there was a sort of 2 sections that I was working within the sort of media group. One was kind of all things what they called then new media, which was actually pre most of the internet. It was things like TV at gas stations and, these sort of outdoor mediums and all these new things that were propping up everywhere. And then the other one was much more traditional, just television, and, sort of evaluating networks as potential places for advertisers to put their money and helping sort of figuring out how to pair those 2 things. And I found myself really interested in media and television particularly, and slowly but surely kind of shifted away from the advertising side to the network side. And, from there sort of evolved into the storytelling side and production and programming and content, and, just found myself at a bunch of different networks throughout the years, in different roles, producing TV and film and that sort of thing. And about 5 years ago, about 6 years ago, actually, at this point, I met Kathleen Rogers, who's the president of EarthDayorg, and she was talking about putting on an event on the National Mall to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which was in 2020.
God, has it been that long?
Wow. It's been that long. And and I said, that sounds great. And I had time to do it at the time. So I joined the org to help put on this live event in 2020. Well, about 3 months into that, something called COVID hit and kind of changed our plans just a little bit.
Sure.
And so In some ways, as terrible as it was, in some ways there was some good things that came out of it. At least for Earth Day. So we were one of the earliest live events. If you recall, all these things were happening where artists were performing from their living room and celebrating various causes or doing concerts from their home because that's the only thing they could do. So we shifted from a physical event, the National Mall, to a purely digital one. Ended up having 20 million people watch our live stream. And it continued for 3 days, actually. So it became, and I think it may still be, one of the largest, live events.
So it really resonated. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it really resonated. It hit at a good time, I think. I think we had a message that resonated and people were looking for something to bond around. Ironically, the interesting part about the 20 million is that's actually the same number of people that came out for the original Earth Day back in 1970.
Wow.
When this whole thing kind of started. So different phenomena, different everything, but
different people.
Weirdly, kind of different people, everything, but kind of a similar interest, right, in a very different way. And there were other things going on too around Earth Day in 2020. It wasn't just our live event, but yeah, so that's how I kind of got into it. And based on the success of that, I said, look, I think there's a lot more that this organization and frankly, the environmental movement can be doing digitally and with media and pushing things out there. And you're well aware with the show you have, of course. And so I stayed on to help sort of build some of that momentum there. And so, today we thankfully we're back in the real world also and doing things on the ground and in real life, but we also have a huge digital presence. And that's really helped us to get the word out about, what we're pushing for environmental issues.
It's kind of interesting how
long answer to a really short question. Sure.
No, it's amazing because almost every guest I talk to talks about that time, that period of COVID and how it moved things in a different direction. And I hope what it really did to all of us is kind of scared us all, that something like that could happen so quickly. And COVID is that's a disease that spread, but it could be any phenomena that could paralyze the earth. We seem to think our systems are not to be penetrated, that they're resilient, and I think to a degree we are. I mean, it depends on your attitude, right? But I look at your resume, by the way, and I say they're kind of similarly themed. I don't know if you ever thought about it like that, but I look at it and I'm like, okay, manager of Discovery and Science channels. Well, that's kind of a cool thing, right? That's what I would say is that it's impact-based, your whole career. ABC Family Channel at Disney. Again, Family Channel is not just about entertaining, but it's about educating youth, right? And we do that with our nonprofit Urban Farming Education. But and then, TV Guide and Fox Family Worldwide at News Corp. It's all these are all things that most people would kind of dream about, having a job that would have, an impact, not just going to work on a job you hate to do, And EarthDayorg would be like a pretty serious, impactful type of switch to a career. So to walk me through the whole Earth Day and the EarthDayorg. So I guess I remember Earth Day. I hate to say it, but I wasn't a baby at the time. And I remember it, and it was a feel-good thing, and it was like finally we're all paying attention to Mother Earth and all that, right? But when did the EarthDay.org start, and how was that connected to the first Earth Day? What is that all about? And you mentioned the president of it, and I forgot to catch her name there, but I guess it'd be your
Kathleen Rogers.
Okay, so tell me a little about her and how she got in there.
Yeah, well, I'll even start before that. It just, sort of the evolution of Earth Day itself was, it really came about in 1969, the sort of planning of it. And it was really a time when people were, beginning to, Rachel Carson's book had come out earlier in the 60s, and people were starting to say, yeah, what are we doing here exactly? There's suddenly there were rivers on fire, literally, smog in the cities. There's a huge oil spill off of California in 1969. And I think people were starting to wake up that, maybe this sort of industrial world we're living in has some effects that we're not super happy about, and we need to think about. And so it was actually a senator from Wisconsin. I didn't know him. I was just a kid. But Gaylord Nelson, who originally had the idea for, let's do something and get the people sort of, fired up about these issues. And so he and a couple others brought on a guy named Dennis Hayes, who was a college student who had some background in organizing, and said, let's do these, what they called at the time, teach-ins across college campuses, and start to get the student population, university population interested in environmental issues. And, we'll call it National Teach-In Day or something like that. And Dennis took it to some agency people and said, we got a better idea. Let's call it Earth Day, and let's go beyond college campuses. Let's really take it across the country and see if we can get people fired up and hopefully turn that into some meaningful change. And so, as I mentioned earlier, on Earth Day, 20 million people came out, demonstrating, New York City, on college campuses, across the country, Washington, D.C., the West Coast, and everywhere in between, asking for change and trying to highlight that things needed to happen to protect the environment, protect our health, all of those things. And so shortly out of that, things like the EPA were formed, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. A lot of people don't know, but Richard Nixon was a pretty important president in a lot of this legislation.
The beginning of the 72, I think.
It was a nonpartisan issue. It was really, it really crossed all the parties and all the interests, and a lot happened in a very short period of time. And I'm not here to tell you all of it was because of Earth Day, but a lot of it was, and it really was one of the things that kicked off the movement. Dennis Hayes is still with us today, and in fact, he's the link from the first Earth Day to EarthDayorg today. He's our chairman emeritus. He started the organization and has been with us and with the organization since. He's played a big role this year in helping us think about our theme and how we activate some of these things. So I guess once an activist, always an activist. I don't know, but he's a pretty inspiring force, and it's a really cool story. I mean, he's still fighting the fight every day, and and it has that terrific link back, 54 years now to the first Earth Day in 1970. So that's our brief history.
That's great. But Earth Day is a day, right? So how does EarthDay.org become 365 days a year?
Yeah. So what we try and do is, thankfully, Earth Day has grown and grown and grown as a day over the years, and something that I think most people, certainly in the U.S. and increasingly around the rest of the world, recognize and often do something on that day themselves or with their company or, different organizations or governments. And so we've really tried to use that day and the awareness about that to help then push into our programs that we run year round. So we have programs where we're advocating around the reduction of plastic production. We have a reforestation program where we're trying to plant millions of trees around the world in areas that need it. We have a program that's raising awareness around the impacts of fast fashion. We have a very long-running, all the way back really to the original Earth Day education program, where we're working with mostly K through 12 organizations, teachers organizations, as well as education organizations at the global level. So working with the UN and those types of organizations to try and bring climate and environmental education into schools and through the education system. So we really, for us, it is true. Earth Day is every day. We really are, we're using Earth Day as sort of this big tentpole, if you will. But it really extends beyond that. And, we're out there trying to raise awareness and get policy change and all those kinds of things every day. That's what I do every day at this point.
Right.
So
it's interesting.
Earth Day every day for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I'm in the process of writing a variety of books, and one of them is really about agriculture and its impacts. But as I started to read it, and again, it's just an early Alzheimer's moment for me. But I just finished reading a book, and I can't remember the lady's name or the name of the book, but it'll come to me. But it's a great book, and it talks about this age that we're supposedly just entering called the Apothene Age, which is about chemical overload, right? And I'm sure you're very aware, but it started talking about the big pollution industries, and number one is mining. Of course, we need mining because, everything we live on is mined from the earth. Sustainable mining would be a great thing. I mean, that would be, if we could curb some of the impact from that would be important. Second one was agriculture. And agriculture is something that I'm involved with. And I guess I've always been with my landscape company, but also with the soil company we have. And, bringing on a new product like hemp and things like that fit better in rotation as more regenerative farming. So that idea of the Apothene Age was kind of scary but basically in this book, it talks, and I thought all the impacts were really about people driving their cars and all of that, which is part of the fossil fuel thing is part of it. But the concept of agriculture being a big polluter, and I guess shipping, materials all over the planet just to, so we can have grapes in the middle of the winter in Wisconsin, and nobody wants to go backwards per se, but to being very aware of what we're doing and the causes. This Apothene Age, though, was kind of scary because basically, I think the premise of her book is that it's too late, that we can't go back, because now it's not just all the chemicals that we're producing, which, by the way, every decade or so, we double the amount of types of chemicals. And as they get into the atmosphere, they start creating their own little science projects up there, right? They start compounding. And so we don't know exactly what the long-term impacts are, but and it's the same thing with our agriculture, how we're taking, petrochemicals and synthetics, and we're deep tilling, so we have a tremendous amount of erosion and wind erosion and water erosion. We end up with damage to the biology in the soils. So all of these things, how do you, with EarthDayorg, how do you, so two questions here. How do you kind of address all of those things? You're basically just trying to make people aware and talking to people who are directly on the battle lines. That would be, like the first question. And then my other question is kind of more personal. Do you see yourself as an optimist or a pessimist? Obviously, you're working on this, so you must think that we're not beyond hope. So that was be my first question.
Let me answer the second one first, I think, because it probably frames the rest of it. But you have to be an optimist, I think, to be in this, because I think you might lose your mind otherwise, frankly. But I think you have to. Look, my feeling is, we're in a pretty incredible species. We've accomplished a lot of things. We've caused some harm along the way, absolutely. But I think we can. I think if we dedicate ourselves to it, if we actually accept the scope and scale of the problems that we've created, I'm optimistic we can we can get through them. I'm not sure we're going to end up in a world that's what it was 200 years ago in terms of, what the biodiversity looks like and those sorts of things. But I do think that we can get to a place where we can rectify some of the damage we've done and certainly live a cleaner lifestyle, cleaner for the planet and the environmental health. I mean, I think, I'm optimistic that things like AI can actually end up being a real positive and help us think at a higher level and help us get to solutions faster. That's probably a controversial opinion in some circles, I'm sure. But I think, and that's partly, I guess, my background, in media and entertainment and technology as well. So I am a bit of a tech enthusiast, I suppose. But I do think that, humans are good at that. And what we have to figure out is how do we be good at that while, simultaneously not, doing a lot of damage to, the only home we have, right? So I am optimistic. I think we're gonna find solutions. We're gonna get ahead. I mean, one of the things I think about a lot is if you rewind, I don't know, 25, 30 years, the discussions then about things like wind and solar seemed impossible. The cost was incredibly high and the production was not very good. And it just didn't seem like that was right around the corner. And now you fast forward to today, and one of the things I find, I just realized this a few months ago. I didn't know how fast this had changed, but the biggest renewable energy producing state in the country is Texas. Texas
Yeah.
tea, the home of oil, right? The home of fossil fuel production. They're making more renewables than anybody else in the country, even more than California. That's an amazing change, right? And I think that speaks to our capacity. Like, that's not something anyone would have predicted 30 years ago, right? And so I think that kind of thing gives me a lot of hope that, we're going to figure it out, whether we are doing it because we think it's the right thing to do or because we realize there's a huge amount of money to make by doing so. There's a lot of different, motivations for people. But I think ultimately we're moving towards a more sustainable society at large. The real question is, can we get there fast enough? Will there be the right incentives to do it? But I think progress is being made, and sometimes, when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see. But I think if we start to take a longer view, there are some really positive things. There's some negative things too, of course. But so yeah, I guess I'm optimistic. I think we're good at figuring things out, and if we really put ourselves to,
I think it's the concept of an adaptive process or an adaptive thinking, right? So in our work with hemp right now, I just went to the NOCO hemp conference, which is probably the biggest one in the world, where they talk about all these alternatives, and they actually have a product that they think is kind of ready for to be launched that will change plastics. So these single-use plastics, which we know are the scourge of the planet, and that just happened in 20 years. Blink your eyes, and all of a sudden we got this problem with those, right? But now this new technology is it uses plastics, but it's also using hemp. And if you put these bottles in the ocean, they'll biodegrade within a month. So, boom, there's a potential solved problem there. And if that doesn't work, something else will come down. I agree with you that technology it's not something we can put back into the bottle. And 200 years ago, 80% of the population was involved with some sort of agriculture. Well, people don't want to be out in the sun, 12 hours a day and have their children out there and slaving and having problems organizing them. And that's why that, even though some people don't like them all the time, the USDA does ensure a fairly edible food source for us that's not poisoning us at large, and we're all being fed, right? So there's some things that are part of that. When you mention AI, I use it, and I there's no way it's going back. As people's jobs are threatened, they want to put a stop on it, and they want to slow it down, and all these things. But I agree with you that it's the next evolution of this technology, right? But what is interesting is, 50 years ago when Bill Gates came up with the computer in every home, I think at that time we all probably thought that it would make us all smarter. But in fact, it's proven the opposite, right? I mean, this is not a smarter population or generation than it was in the past, except for maybe some of the science people, that have been able to build upon people before them, and only being able to do that with computer power, So when you're mentioning the plastics, that's a big one. And then you just mentioned clothing too. I think I read the statistic was about 28% of our clothes are now micro plastics, right? They're synthetic.
Yeah, I've seen even higher. I think, what I've seen, and that may be 100%, but I think from what I've seen, it's almost 70% now have some plastics in them. So it might be a blend, right? But it's an incredibly high number of clothing items.
And now when we look at that, number one, it's a disposable. We're all disposable, right? I mean, I remember as a kid having one pair of shoes that I probably put $1 bill in to keep the hole from destroying my socks, right? And a pair of jeans and a T-shirt or two. Now it's like we have rooms in our house that are our secondary closets, and we've
moved from
disposable.
There used to be seasons of clothes, right? Like there'd be the fall collection and the spring collection, right? That was the big thing with the big designers. Not that I ever really cared that much personally, but that was the thing. These fast fashion companies they've literally stated their goal is to basically have a season every week, 52 a year. Wow. So that, whatever you bought last week, well, it's not good enough now. It's not cool enough anymore. You got to have this week's, right? And a lot of these are fairly inexpensive. Not all of them, but a lot of them are fairly inexpensive. So it seems like a great deal until you realize that, you wear it 3 times and it's trashed, right? That's it. Or, it's made to go out of fashion quickly, so you just don't want to wear it anymore, right? And, what's happening now is this scourge of clothing that's being, worn and thrown away, or even worse, there's a lot of overproduction from these companies, and they just trash the inventory. It's cheaper for them to make more than they need, make sure they sell as much as they can, and then just literally trash the rest of it. So it's made, never used, and just heads to landfill immediately, right? And, again, with such a high percentage of these being plastics, fast fashion is quickly becoming one of the biggest sources of microplastic and nanoplastic pollution in the world, because they hit the landfills. Some are burned, so it goes in the air. Some are make its way to the waterways, the rivers, the oceans, et cetera. They break down. They don't biodegrade. They just turn into microplastics, and that's where they remain. And, they find their way then into our water systems, into our, into the food we eat, into the air we breathe. And, that's just from clothes. There's a lot of other things that are doing that too, right? So that's a solvable problem. We've created this problem in the last, really, to the extent it's happening now, really in the last 5 years, it's just exploded. And we can fix these things with some education. I don't think most people realize the impact that these fast fashion companies are having, the negative impacts, and that's not even talking about the emissions impacts. estimates between 7 and 10% of all emissions are the result of fast fashion. That's insane.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy. We don't need to be doing that. So, I think there's some things where we can go, okay, that was a bad idea. let's not do that anymore, right? And we don't have to go back to the day where you're putting $1 in your shoe, but certainly there's got to be somewhere between those two that makes sense.
Yeah.
Go for it, right?
And interesting, I'm going to have to post this book now on the author because I'm going to refer, all these statistics are in this book. And this book was really written about the chemical overload. And most of my focus is really about farming and about regenerative farming and land management and that kind of thing. But when I realized, and farming's was part of the issue too, with pesticides and herbicides and things like that. But she did mention in that book that when these clothes break down, especially when they get into our waterways, which they do every time you wash a shirt, the microplastics are so small, they're micro, right? They're so micro, kind of by definition means you need a microscope, I guess, to see it. They are seen by the next level up as zooplankton. And so that's kind of your basic food that all the rest of the fish eat, including us, by the time it gets, on our plate. Right. And like you said, it just doesn't, it never biodegrades at that level. That is what it is. And we are, I think I mentioned this before on a podcast that we're literally eating our own clothes, which is a little bad considering our clothes, plastic clothes aren't that tasty, so.
There's also some research, and this is an area that needs more research, but there's been some research that indicates that we might be absorbing the plastics as well. So, through the workout clothes you're wearing or whatnot, there's some mounting evidence that that's another way it's getting into our body. So we're breathing it, we're eating it, we're drinking it, we're absorbing it, every way you can think of. And what's happened a couple of years ago, there was I think they were out of Amsterdam, a group that did some research that they finally, were able to discover definitively that these microplastics and nanoplastics, which are the even smaller version, are making their way into our bloodstream. And so by making their way into our bloodstream, that means they can start to accumulate in any organ in our body, potentially. Last month, I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine came out with a report, was analyzing patients with heart disease, and they found that vast majority of them had microplastics in their arteries as part of the plaque that was causing heart disease, heart failure, stroke, etc. So they've made their way in, they've made their way to our heart, they're causing blockages in our heart. And that's just the microplastics themselves. Then there's the chemicals that go into making the different types of plastic. So if you have a softer plastic, it's one type of chemical. A harder plastic is another type of chemical. Many of those chemicals are something like 14,000 chemicals that go into the various types of plastics as they're made. We know about a quarter of those are toxic to humans if consumed. Those are making their way into our bodies too. And so those are causing problems, endocrine disruptors, we're seeing cancer-related issues, all kinds of things. So whether it's the physical microplastic, that piece that's causing a problem like in our heart, or it's the chemicals that are leaching out of them that are causing problems in other parts of our body. These are serious things. And the research is just coming out that's really pointing to, a real potential crisis coming from this. And it really is just, at the end of the day, it's related to how much is being produced. The current estimates are that by 2040, it's not that far away, we'll double what we're producing now. We'll triple it by 2060.
Right.
We've already doubled it from just 10 years ago. So it's increasing at this unbelievable pace.
And we're we're both sitting here in the United States, but this isn't just a U.S. problem. Although we're the leaders, I think we're kind of the leaders in a lot of industry. But as we see it, the problem, one of the problems is who regulates it all, and or is it even possible for the regulators? You know, they may see the impact as these things combine to do damage 20, 30 years from now or 40 years from now. And so, because I think when things get regulated, it's regulated, and science does this, it breaks it down into its individual components. You regulate one product and you test it, and sure, we take a piece of plastic and hit ourselves on the head, and nothing happens, so we allow it to go on, and it takes a long time to notice these impacts. So what, I guess this is going to bring me back to the question about EarthDayorg. As you guys are sitting in this place, because if you really think about it, there's not that many organizations out there or movements out there that are taking a look at the earth or the environment, that are saying, hey, wait, how do we take care of what's common to all of us, right? There was a book years ago called Governing the Commons. How do we, as individuals, you know, if I knew I could make some money off of putting my money in stocks, you know, and maybe the plastic company or energy company, I wouldn't really think necessarily about the impacts as I was making money on it, or if that was my job, or if that's how I was feeding my families, right? So we all have these individual requirements or needs, right? And so this is what makes it complicated. When humans are involved, things get complicated. So from EarthDayorg, you guys are really in a very critical place to be kind of the filter. And you're a media guy, so you know what I mean by filter. If you're watching a certain news channel, it means you're one of them or you're one of them, right? And you, early on, you talked about in the early days with Nixon, it was not a partisan issue. All this pollution and all that. And now it seems, you know, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, things become politicized, right? And so how do you address that? How do you guys look at where you are? You're informing people. You're a part of that filter. How do people? How do you broadcast that? I mean, do you have books out, or do you have a television series, or how do you do it?
Yeah, we do a lot of things. So, you know, one great resource if people are just looking for things, just to plug us a little bit, is our website, EarthDayorg. And I say that just because it is a resource for a lot of our reports and information and sorts of things. But yeah, I mentioned we did that live stream back in 2020, and since then we've been doing a series called EarthDay Live, which are these regular live digital events we do, where we bring in different stakeholders from the government, from business, individuals, people doing cool things or interesting things around environmental issues, and get those out. And those are regularly seen by, we'll get 100, 200,000 people watching those. And we try to get them out to not just, as you say, the sort of people who you'd expect to watch, but we try and reach as many people as possible. We try and reach, we like to say internally, we try and reach everybody else, meaning not, while we love,
singing to the choir,
the activists, I mean, they know what's going on. We don't need to talk to them about it, right? We're trying to reach other folks. And so I think, at least for our organization, a big part of it is trying to find ways to sort of bring people in that's comfortable for them. So one of the things we do, and there's a big heavy up right now and around Earth Day, is something called the Great Global Cleanup. It is what it sounds like. We work with organizations all over the world on local cleanup. So cleaning up, your local park, the school, your neighborhood, whatnot. And a lot of people, when they're doing that, don't necessarily think of themselves as an environmentalist, right, with a capital E or anything.
Just cleaning
They're
up their neighborhood.
cleaning up their neighborhood. But in the process, we found a lot of people go, God, why are there so many plastic bottles everywhere? Like, what's the deal, right? And
when you
just
clean
start
up, you see it all. Yeah.
You see it, and you start to think about it. And not everybody. Some people, they do the cleanup, and it's great. They help clean up their neighborhood or whatnot, and they go on with their day, and that's fine too. And I think, but some people, they see that, they start to think about it differently. And so, we have things like that where we're just trying to meet people with where they're at and bring them in. And, over time, hopefully we move them up the ladder, if you will, a little bit to get more involved or more active, whatever that means for them. For some people, we have petitions and letters to, Congress and letters to the UN saying, hey, people want this and that to happen, and people can sign on to that. It's pretty easy.
Do you get policymakers that reach out to you or that you're reaching out to as well?
We do, yeah. We featured some of them on our EarthDay Lives and other digital events we do. We regularly go to something called the COP, which is the UN meeting where the Paris Agreement was actually signed on Earth Day, by the way.
Oh, excellent.
And, that's a gathering of global, leaders, environmental ministers, organizations, all trying to, essentially figure out how we figure this out. So we participate on that global level, all the way down to local actions. We're going to be on Earth Day. Myself and a few others are going to be in Ottawa, Canada, where there's something called the Global Plastics Treaty that's being negotiated. And so we're going to be there advocating for change and getting people, actually helping put together a demonstration to get people out in the streets. We probably won't get 20 million people, but get a bunch of people out there to say, hey, we'd really like to see some progress on this plastics issue. And to their credit, these countries, virtually every country in the world is going to be represented there. That I think everyone understands there's a problem with plastics. We've gone too far. It's complicated to figure out what to do about it. That's really
just one component of many components, right? How is your stuff translated internationally? Because I don't know how many, 164 languages or something spoken worldwide, and who knows how many dialects. How does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on the medium we're on, but for instance, our website translates not into 160 or so languages, but several. We also have regional offices for Earth Day. So we have a really large group in India that serves India, but also Southeast Asia. We have a team in Europe that's serving countries across Europe and South America and so forth. So we have groups there that we work with sort of on a global level. They know the local issues and regional issues better than we may know over here, and vice versa. And so we use that local expertise as well. Facebook works in Hindi as well as it does in English, so we take advantage of that, and all those things. So we try and be as global as we can. And we have presence, as I say, in Asia and in Africa and South America and Europe, and obviously here in the U.S.
And I think it's really what you were saying is it really kind of resonates, is that we're not trying to sing to the choir, right? We actually trying to reach everyone, because this is a people problem, not a bipartisan or partisan problem. It's kind of funny when you mentioned Texas. That was a perfect example, because Texas is a leader in solar. Interesting enough, I don't know what book I got it out of, but it was quite a while ago I read. It talked about Texas was one of the major polluters. People just threw stuff out of their cars. And they came up with a campaign, Don't Mess with Texas. And they became the proudest, cleanest state in the union. So it's a matter of how you reach people. and it's not as obvious as we think. It's just logic, and to me, logic is about sustainability, right? And now we're starting to see major corporations with sustainability officers, and what they're trying to do is it's profitable to be sustainable, right? It's not profitable for us to throw our waste away when the waste can be diverted into changing the soils, for instance, for agriculture. So it is kind of an interesting setup. But I'm going to have to wrap up. And the first question, one last question is, what are the big plans? Because we're coming up on your birthday. We're coming up on the biggest day of the year, right? So tell me just really quickly what you think, or tell me what your plans are.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of things. I mentioned the Great Global Cleanup. We're actually hosting the world's largest cleanup on Earth Day. 100,000 people in Malaysia will be getting together for one cleanup. So a huge event there.
Wow.
And then thousands of others around the world we're participating in. I mentioned we'll be up in Ottawa campaigning there around the Global Plastics Treaty. We're doing, we have a series, in addition to Earth Day Live, we have something called 22 Minutes With, and it's with a different, guest each week. We do those on Earth Day's on the 22nd. We do those on the 22nd of every month. And then during Earth Week, we're doing, a bunch of them. So go to our website and check that out. And you can hear from some really, really interesting people doing some cool stuff around the planet. It's guests are from India, the US, all over the world. Just campaigning and trying to get the word out on climate, on plastics, on all these issues.
Yeah.
If you go to our website, there's a Earth Day 2024 page. You can see, I don't even know how many things we have on there, things you can do as an individual. As I said, if you want to just, do a cleanup or you want to sign a petition, that's there. If you want to get involved deeper, all those options.
So you're local, you're statewide, you're national, you're international. You got it kind of all covered there.
We're everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And does EarthDay.org take money and contributions and donations?
Gosh, thank you for raising that. We do. I always forget to talk about that, but we are a nonprofit, and we are Earth Day every day, all year. So we do need support to do the work we do. So yeah, there are several options if you go to earthday.org to donate, and we certainly would appreciate the support.
We will air this on Earth Day with some of our own little special stuff we're doing locally here. And to Tom Cosgrove, my special guest for today, I appreciate you being here. And I think we've talked about all the different ways to connect with earthday.org, and it's a great organization, and we need everyone to get involved with it. So I appreciate you being here, and we'll talk to you soon. Good luck next week.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Happy Earth Day, everybody.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.